And today we have an exciting speaker that actually I am familiar with. This is David Bukowski. He is a special agent. And if I'm sorry, I'm turning this way because I'm reading it off my other computer. He's a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, our FBI. He received his Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. He has been a special agent with the FBI for 24 years, and he was assigned to San Antonio Division, the McAllen RA, and now he is with the Knoxville Division. He has been primarily assigned violent crime investigations and human resources. Prior to the FBI, he was an officer with the Chattanooga Police Department for 11 years. Welcome, Special Agent Bukowski, and you have the floor.
Well, very good. Thank you very much. I'm going to repeat a little bit of what she just said. Again, I started my law enforcement career with the Chattanooga Police Department back in 1987. I was a patrolman for my first 5 years, worked the inner city of Chattanooga. I enjoyed that job a lot. It's just such a variety of work. You're the first responder on all things from medical to car crashes to domestic violence to robberies. I mean, just every day was something different. In fact, you didn't know what was going to happen in the next 5 minutes. So it was a great variety of work. I enjoyed it very much. Right around my 5th year of being in patrol, I was asked by the chief if I'd be interested in going to work with the FBI on a newly developed Safe Streets Task Force. That was a violent crime initiative through the Department of Justice and the FBI, where we focused on violent street gangs, violent crime. And then in Chattanooga, that's a rather small office. That's part of the Knoxville division of the FBI, but they have about 10 agents. And then they were involved in some very complex investigations where they needed additional manpower. The FBI didn't have it. They asked the local police department and the sheriff's office to contribute bodies. And at one point we had 3 Chattanooga police officers and 2 Hamilton County sheriff's deputies assigned to the FBI. And what's neat about a federal task force is that you have the same, you get sworn in as a special federal deputy, and then you have the same federal authority as any of the FBI agents that you're working with, but you're also have all that state authority as well. Not every state in the United States recognizes federal officers as peace officers, so it's really a balancing act. When I was on the task force, I had the best of both worlds. Now, my federal authority only allowed me to stay in the state of Tennessee. If we left the state of Tennessee, I had to be accompanied by a federal agent. But then my authorities stayed. Again, working with the FBI as a Chattanooga police officer, I was exposed to so much more long-term investigations than I did as a patrolman. Because patrolman, you're really that triage. You're identifying what the issue is. You're either working that car wreck or that preliminary investigation on the crime, but then you're handing that off to an investigator, and then you went on to the next call for service. With the FBI, these were long-term investigations. We worked traditional, the bank robberies. We worked some drug investigations targeting the organized crime. And when you think of organized crime, sometimes you think of New York and they're running these organizations, but even our organized drug trafficking organizations, that's organized crime. But we used Title III authority, which is wiretaps, to investigate these organizations. But it was very effective. Oftentimes police departments, they're going to target those people that are causing problems. And it's sort of like picking apples out of an apple tree. You can pick apples all day long. You're never going to kill the tree. Well, the FBI's philosophy is, we're going to take that tree down at the trunk. We're going to identify the source of the drugs, even if it goes back to another country. And that's how you disrupt an organization like that. I was also exposed to some complex violent crime investigations. There was two strings of, or two groups of individuals that were doing robberies where they were kidnapping bank employees, holding their families hostage, and then sending the employee back into the bank, basically to rob their own bank. So in 1990, I guess it was around 95 was the first one. We had a copycat case in 1996. And we were able to resolve those cases, but those were long-term well, one of them was long-term investigation. One, we got some lucky breaks early on, identified them, got one of the two people involved in it to cooperate, and we were able to disrupt that really quick. So I was really very happy with my career at the police department, but being associated with those federal investigations and knowing that being on the task force was not going to last my entire career, I'd go back at some point. But looking at the pay and the benefits and things like that, working for the federal government, I did apply to be a special agent. That was, it's a tough process. They're looking for talented people, not just in law enforcement, not just former military, but in all degree fields. That's what makes the FBI unique when it comes to law enforcement. We have about 13,000 agents worldwide. Only about 20% of those agents have law enforcement or military experience. 80% are everybody else, from lawyers to accountants. We process school teachers, history majors, music majors, engineers, anything you can think of, the FBI is willing to take. Of course, they want you to be good at that in your degree field. To become an FBI agent, you have to be a minimum of 23 years old. And you have to start the academy no later than your 37th birthday. So you really have to start the process no later than your 36th birthday. Our average age of hire is 31 or 32. We're looking for people that are mature, that have some good life experiences that they can bring to the table. It is challenging physically, and we're seeing that more and more, that people are struggling with the physical fitness test, and that's just for events. That's a minute's worth of sit-ups, followed by a 300-meter sprint, 1 minute, push-ups to exhaustion, but there's no time limit, but it is a constant motion exercise, and then a 1.5 mile run. Most people can do most of those events individually, but they have a real struggle doing those 4 events with a 5-minute break in between. The FBI has put out an app. It's called Physical Fitness Test App, and it's on, regardless of what type of phone, you can download it for free. But it shows videos, it gives you self-tests. If you're struggling in an area, to give you some exercises to do to improve. So I got in the FBI in 1998, went to Quantico. Back then it was a 16-week course. It's it's going back to school. I was 32, I was married, I had 2 kids, and then, it's 2 people per room, 4 people per suite. And I was there, I went home 1 weekend during that 16-week period, and that was over Easter. But it's fascinating, the types of people that the FBI attracts. But don't sell yourself short. When I got there, even though I knew I had all this experience, around me were these lawyers, and we had engineers. It was just really fascinating, the variety of backgrounds people had. Successfully completed Quantico. It is not going to make you an expert in anything, you're going to learn that in the field. Everybody, regardless of your background, gets trained the same at Quantico. You're going to get lots of firearms training. Again, 80% of the people have never fired a gun before. You know, they've never put handcuffs on people. They're going to teach you those things while you're at Quantico. And some of it is like practical applications. You know, they have built Hogan's Alley. That is like a small town. They have motel and a bar and a movie theater, houses with screwy staircases, all these things where you learn to either search, you know, execute arrest plans, but you have to do it safely. And that's the key. So it's sort of like worst case scenario. They're going to really challenge you. When you can use deadly force, when you cannot. But again, it's really a program where it's crawl, walk, run. They're not going to just throw you into the fire. They're going to show you how to do it. You're going to go slow. You're going to pick up the pace. And by the end of Quantico, you're going to be competent in a lot of those skills. But even defensive tactics, people think we're going to learn all these martial arts skills. You do learn defensive tactics, but it's basically learn to keep distance from people, keep people off of you. They're not going to make you into, you know, the Karate Kid, where you're going to be fighting off all these people. They're going to give you some skills, and then it's up to you to maintain and improve on those skills. So 16 weeks of Quantico. Week 4 of Quantico, you get your orders. You're going to get orders to one of 56 field offices in the United States. So in Tennessee, we have 2 offices. One's in Memphis, one's in Knoxville. Each office has satellite offices. So for Knoxville, we have an office in Johnson City, Chattanooga, and Tullahoma. And Tullahoma only has 2 agents. They have no support staff, so they answer the phone, they answer the door, they process all their own evidence. For an office like Knoxville, we have somebody to do all those things. So the agents are really focused on their casework. Some people like that satellite officer away from the bosses. You know, they sort of run their own show, where in the office you're sort of, and they get a much more variety of work. Sometimes in the field offices, you're going to get one type of violation to work, and that's what you're going to work for a while anyway. So week 4 of the academy, I get orders to San Antonio division. I was pretty excited about that, thinking San Antonio is a nice city. It's in, you know, a relatively affordable state. About 2 weeks later, they amended my orders to tell me I'm going to McAllen, Texas. McAllen, Texas is a satellite office about 250 miles south of San Antonio on the Mexican border with Reynosa, Mexico. If you watch any of the immigration or the migrant concerns that people have on the border, a lot of that is filmed in the McAllen sector of the Rio Grande Valley. It's one of the larger border patrol areas on the southwest border. Of course, I had moved around a lot as a kid. My dad was in retail. We moved around. My wife had never left the area of Chattanooga. She was born and raised in Soddy Daisy, Tennessee. If any of you know where that is, it's just a little bit north of Chattanooga. And so she moves from there, and her first move away from home is to McAllen, Texas. It was about 1,200 miles from Chattanooga, and it was a culture shock. I mean, day-to-day living is fine, but it's just a different environment. Living on the border, there's you know, a lot of drug trafficking. There's not a lot of drug use in McAllen, but a lot of drugs come across the border. And most Americans don't know this, but the Border Patrol has what's known as an extended border. And that is about 75 miles north of the border. They have checkpoints where they stop all traffic, and they're going to search your vehicle. They're going to make sure that you're a U.S. citizen or you're in the country legally. But the trick for the drug traffickers, it's not a problem getting across the Rio Grande River and getting it into the United States. The trick is getting those drugs past the Border Patrol checkpoints, which are about 75 miles north of the border. But the drugs actually double or triple in value if you can get them past the checkpoints. But again, there's like no stigma in the Rio Grande Valley for being involved in drug distribution. Because again, a lot of people don't use the drugs. They're just getting them to distribution cities like Houston and Atlanta, where then they get farmed out throughout the United States. When we worked down there, I was assigned to a violent crime squad. We worked a lot of fugitives because again, people commit crimes. They'll go down into Mexico. Oftentimes they'll try to sneak back in the country. But we had a lot of calls at even Border Patrol checkpoints where they had someone they thought was a fugitive. So we would go fingerprint them and determine whether they're a fugitive or not. We don't rely on the information somebody provides us, because people can just provide false information. Your fingerprints never lie. So if you've ever been processed for, because you've been arrested, even for a misdemeanor, or if you've had a position of trust, oftentimes now, school teachers are sometimes fingerprinted. Everyone in the military has been fingerprinted. A lot of our immigrants are fingerprinted. If the government, the FBI is a storehouse for everyone's fingerprints. We don't own them. They belong to whoever took the fingerprints, but we are the storehouse for them. If I can get your fingerprints, I will know who you are within about 7 minutes. And if you are wanted by somebody, if you're a fugitive, I'm going to know that. So we did a lot of that. In the Rio Grande Valley, we worked a lot of kidnapping cases, but they were all drug-related kidnappings. Someone lost a load of dope. They're going to hold a family member hostage until you pay them back. We worked a lot of extortions where the coyotes would charge you so much money to get you from Mexico into the United States. But once you're in the United States, they would extort your family for additional money to release you into the interior of the United States. Those were tough cases because we would work them as the FBI, but the U.S. Attorney's Office was reluctant to prosecute them only because you'd have to parole those witnesses, your victims, into the country, give them legal status, and then they would disappear into the interior. And it was just hard to keep up with people because you arrest somebody today, they're not going to trial for 60 or 90 days minimum. So it was very challenging. We were basically recovering kidnapped victims from drug dealers, or we were collecting people that had illegally entered the country from, the coyotes. But we didn't have a lot of prosecutions, which was a little bit discouraging, only because it just kept happening. There was no deterrent. Well, one of the neat things about being in McAllen, as much of a hardship as it was for me and my family, if you serve in one of those offices in the Rio Grande Valley or where you're doing Indian country, after 5 years, we could ask for a transfer to another office. And when I was there, they would give you 3 offices with staffing needs after 5 years. And one of my options was Knoxville at the time. So I got back to Knoxville and I worked in Knoxville for since 2003. From 2003 to 2018, I was on a violent crime squad, where we primarily worked bank robberies and commercial robberies. It's very common. Again, it depends on what the drug of choice is at the time. Probably 95% of all bank robbers are fueling an addiction. So, they run out of money. They're not robbing a bank to go pay their bills or buy their kids presents. They're going to banks, robbing banks to go get high. So back in the 90s and early 2000, it was the crack epidemic. You can't steal crack except from another drug dealer. So people would go to the banks, rob the banks, then take that money to their local crack dealer and buy their drugs. back, I think it was 2008 or 2009, we had 60 bank robberies in Knoxville. That's a lot of bank robberies in 1 year. We saw a big drop off in 2015, 2016, but that's when the opioid epidemic started, or was really in full bloom at that point. We had doctors overprescribing. You had just these pain clinics that had popped up. But when the doctors were overprescribing, people didn't have to rob banks, they just doctor shopped. So they weren't committing the violent crimes to get money because they could go to a pain clinic, complain of a backache, the doctor is going to prescribe. They would sell half their prescription and use half their prescription, but then they'd have enough money to go back to the doctor and get another, or go to a different doctor and get more pills. So we really saw our violent crime drop off during the opioid epidemic, because people were doctor shopping rather than committing the robberies. Now, people got so addicted to the pain pills, though, that the FBI and the DEA, most federal law enforcement agencies, were started targeting those pain clinics because people were just so addicted. But as we started shutting down the pain clinics and identifying those doctors who were overprescribing, the customer, the drug addict, transitioned to heroin. Now the heroin, of course, you can't go to the store and steal heroin. You have to go to an illegal drug dealer again. But again, so the heroin and of course they were starting to incorporate the fentanyl in with the heroin. And of course, people on the street are trusting the Chinese and the Mexicans to mix it right, because if you don't mix the fentanyl in with the coke or the heroin right, it's going to cause overdoses. What did I hear? That the fentanyl is like 100 times more potent than morphine. But people are seeking that perfect high. And I know Knox County last year, and this is the only county I'm familiar with, I think they had 435 overdose deaths in Knox County alone last year. You don't hear a lot about that in the news. We're more focused on COVID and everything else, but COVID may have been more involved in deaths last year, but again, 435 people dying of sticking a needle in their arm. It's terrible. I did some training at the forensic center where they take all the bodies for autopsy here in the region. And I think we watched 5 autopsies. 3 of the 5 were definitely drug overdoses. Everyone in their 30s. It's just they're in the prime of life and they're falling over dead because we're buying drugs on the black market, and you're not dealing with true chemists that are mixing things right. They're just guessing. So, boy, I got off track. Where was I at? I've had some great cases that I've worked with other agencies. One misconception that I think a lot of people have is when the FBI comes in, that we send everybody else home. That is just not the case. In Knoxville, I think we have about 10 different agencies in our building other than the FBI. So I know Knoxville PD, Clinton PD, Blount County Sheriff's Office, Knox County, TBI, UTPD, Tennessee Highway Patrol, Homeland Security, Tennessee Department of Treasury. They all work with us on a lot of our cases. So we try to stay, we work with all of our local agencies. So when they have a significant case that's really impactful and we need, a stiffer penalty, we get involved. That's the real hammer for the federal system. There is no probation or parole. So if you get a 100-year sentence, and I've had people get that. You got to serve 85% of your sentence, rather than in the state where for a first offender, you're getting about 30% of your sentence and you can get 2 days for one. So you end up with serving 15% of your sentence. The federal government's the exact opposite. The best you can do with good behavior and everything is you can get 15% off your sentence. So back in probably 2009 or 10, we had a group of guys, and they ranged in age. There were 5 guys. They ranged in age from 21 to 56, and they were committing robberies of CVS pharmacies. And again, this is right at probably at the beginning of the pill epidemic. But the pharmacies weren't securing their Schedule 1 and 2 drugs. They just had them on the shelf during business hours. So these guys would go in armed. They would take over the store. They would steal all the drugs, and they'll be out of the store in just a few minutes. The pharmacy started locking up their drugs, so they were in the stores longer. But this one crew did 9 robberies throughout East Tennessee, but they were getting hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of pills that were sold on the black market. We went to trial with 2 of them. 3 of them cooperated. If you ever get yourself in a bind, cooperate with the federal government, because they're going to reduce your sentence a lot. And I've got a couple of examples of that. The first guy that cooperated in this case was maybe the worst player of them all, but he was very knowledgeable about the system. And he agreed to it. He wanted a deal up front, basically. He accepted a 10-year plea for these robberies in order to cooperate. Well, the ones that decided to go to trial, one was a 23-year-old, one was a 56-year-old. I'm sorry, one was 21. He was the one that was jumping over the counter. He fired rounds inside the pharmacies just to intimidate people. He ended up with a 121-year sentence in federal court. Now, he's only got to do 85% of that, but the reality is he's never going to get out of prison. The 56-year-old did fewer robberies, and he was much less violent. In fact, the old guys didn't really like working the robberies with the young guys because the young guys were too violent. The old guys would just say, hey, you don't have to, just show them the gun. You don't have to fire it to get their attention. But he ended up with a 56-year prison sentence, and he was 56 years old. So the likelihood of him ever getting out of prison is very slim. But that was a case that was worked by the FBI, Knoxville PD, and Knox County Sheriff's Office. But we worked together every day on that case, pooled our resources, and we had a good outcome. Another, I mentioned, besides bank robberies, we talked about pharmacy robberies. We have what's called Hobbs Act robberies. Those are commercial robberies where it impacts interstate commerce. That means just about anything that you rob affects interstate commerce. The Hardys down the road, they're getting their beef from Iowa. So if you can show that that robbery affected that business, which is engaged in interstate commerce, you can pretty much work it. So we had another guy that did 9 robberies. Some of those were commercial places. I know he robbed a Subway. He robbed an adult bookstore on Chapman Highway. But the most creative we got with his case was he robbed another drug dealer. But the drugs they were selling were party drugs. It was Molly. And the U.S. attorney, and there was some case law on this, that even though it's an illegal business that they were engaged in, they're getting their drugs interstate, because all the Molly was coming from China, and they were just selling it here. So we could show that interstate nexus. And unfortunately, this boy's name was Tyler Schaefer. What drew our attention to him was that he crashed. He stole all this Molly. He was selling some of it. He was using some of it. Well, one night he crashed into a church van filled with teenagers, but he killed the driver, killed another student, and injured 11 others. But one of our KPD officers that was working with us on the task force, he actually knew people from that church and just went to visit him. But you know, the bad guy was also at the hospital. He was injured as well, but he had a unique tattoo on his forearm, which we had been looking for because we had seen these other robberies. So we were able to tie him to all these robberies. And so federally, we prosecuted him for the Hobbs Act robberies. The state came behind us and they charged him with the vehicular homicide. He got 100 years federal and 40 years in the state. And he's got only served 85% or 85 years of that 100-year sentence federally. But he was not moved by the fact that he disrupted their lives. He killed 2 people during this robbery spree. But that took great satisfaction to put these cases together. And we're the FBI, the other law enforcement investigators, we're the advocate for the victims of crime. The victims would have never got justice if we had not done our job well. So we investigate these cases as best we can to bring justice to the victims. People think we're only out looking for bad guys. So that's not the case. You know, we want the bad guys off the street because it's a very, very small percentage of the population that is committing a vast majority of the crime. If we keep turning them loose, they're going to continue to victimize. So our job is to put good cases together. Prisons are built for some people, but the crime rates have dropped. They've come up a little bit recently, but from the 70s and 80s, violent crime rates are down tremendously, and that's because we've identified who those predators are. We put them in jail for a long time, and they can't. There's no recidivism when you're going to prison. One of the more interesting cases that I've worked in the last few years was another bank employee kidnapping and extortion. That was, I think it started in 2015. 2 guys one was from New York, one was from Vermont. They met each other in prison. Both of them were serving time in prison, but they met up when they both got out. They traveled to the south. They were actually looking for medium-sized cities where they could blend in with the traffic, but they could get into a rural area very quickly. And that describes East Tennessee very well. But the first robbery they attempted was the Y-12 Federal Credit Union. They kidnapped the CEO, kidnapped him and his family at his house. And they duct taped the wife and the son. They sent him back into his bank, but because he's the CEO, they thought he could go in there and get all the money. But the CEO had never been in his vault. He didn't have access to the money. He had to have others assist him to get into the vault. He actually got into the vault, got the money, but the robbers got spooked and they abandoned the wife and the son and never met to pick up the money. They waited a couple months. They tried it again in Knoxville, and this time they were successful. It was Smart Bank on Cedar Bluff. They kidnapped, the husband was the bank employee. They kidnapped him, the wife, and they had like a 4-month-old baby. Put them all in the same car, and they actually drove them to the bank. He went in, was able to get the employees to help him get into the vault, got some money, brought it back, and they released the wife and the son in that case. And the third case was up in Elizabethton, Tennessee. This was a single mother and her son. He was 4 or 5 at the time. The same scenario, took her to the bank. The robbers kept the child. She went in, her fellow workers refused to help her get in the bank. They thought she was trying to scam them. So she went back to the robbers empty-handed, and they released her and her son. As we investigated these cases, we determined they had done another similar robbery up in Connecticut a few years before. We went a long time without any leads in that case. How it broke was these guys were doing surveillance on another bank employee in Knoxville. They were stopped for speeding on Interstate 40 on the North Carolina side of the line, in the River Gorge area. But they didn't stop when the police tried to pull them over. They wrecked some cars, but when they wrecked, they both ran with duffel bags. They got away that day, but the one piece of evidence that they left behind was a GPS. And we have an agent up in our Johnson City office that is a computer guru. He was able to get into that GPS and determine where that GPS had been. Even though there was not an address in there, your GPS drops breadcrumbs everywhere you go. And he was able to write a program to determine exactly where that went. And we were able to identify our next victim, who they were targeting, plus a residence where they were staying in Maggie Valley, North Carolina. They had rented a cabin. So we set up surveillance. We identified a stolen car that they had in their possession. And when they were on the road, another time, we had the North Carolina State Highway Patrol again, attempted traffic stop. One of them bailed out of the car. He was arrested. The other one took off. And it turned out to be a funny story because he sped away from the troopers. Some of the troopers stayed and arrested the first guy that jumped out of the vehicle. Other troopers gave chase, but this guy did a U-turn and he caused a road rage incident on the interstate. So the police are chasing him and he's got this road rager following behind him. And he finally wrecks a car in his construction site. And the road rager, as this guy tries to run, is actually run over by this 4x4 truck because he had cut him off miles before. But our suspect got caught up under the truck, broke his collarbone and burned his leg on the muffler, and he was wrapped up in the axle. So police got him in custody, and the truck driver drove off, and nobody ever got his name. We still don't know who he is, but he did a great public service that day. So again, that was another case that went to trial. Michael Benatti, one of the guys that he went to trial, his cohort, Brian Witham, cooperated, and he had an incredible memory. He was the most honest bank robber and kidnapper I'd ever been around. He remembered everything. He was very detailed. We could back up everything that he said. He testified in court for 3 days during the trial. We ended up, I think, with about 50 witnesses in that case. Benatti I think there were 28 charges. He was found guilty on all of them. The judge sentenced him to 4 life terms plus I think it's 158 years in federal prison. With them, the government recommended that he get a 40-year sentence. But after the judge heard him testify and all that, the judge actually reduced his agreed upon sentence to 30 years. Now, 30 years is still a long time to be in prison, particularly if you're already, I think he was 45 years old at the time. He won't get out of prison until he's in his near 70. So still a substantial penalty, but that's the difference in cooperating and being honest and, going to trial. Because the 2 guys did the exact same thing. But one accepted responsibility for his wrongdoing and one didn't. One of the great things that some of the great evidence we get are jail calls. If you ever go to jail, all your jail calls are recorded and there's no expectation of privacy. And these guys, they're very careful about what they say initially on the phone, but the longer they stay in jail, the more careless they get. And they give us such incriminating evidence when they're talking to the girlfriend or the mama. It's great stuff. But so we do listen to jail calls, get great evidence that way. But that was another great case. In 2018, the applicant coordinator and the recruiter for Knoxville retired. We have a mandatory retirement age of 57 for our special agents. And that's across the board federally. If you're a gun-toting federal law enforcement agent, you're going to retire by age 57. Well, she retired, she had aged out, and I applied for her job here in the office. And so for the last 4 years or so, I've been doing the applicant processing and recruiting. We primarily recruit agents. Even though the FBI we have 38,000 employees, and I mentioned earlier, there's only 13,000 agents. So only about 1/3 of the FBI is agents. That's what we're best known for. People don't leave the FBI. People that get in the FBI stay their entire career. According to our director, our retention rate is 99.3%. So 99 out of every 100 people we hire stay with us. I'm waiting for someone to give me an example of another agency or another business that can make that claim. And it's because of our mission. You know, we attract really good people. We have a good mission. We have plenty of good work. People enjoy it. When you're doing a public service and we're getting paid better than local law enforcement, our retirement benefits are good. It's a good place to work. I'll just briefly, our starting pay as a special agent is about $88,000 a year. For local law enforcement, I know KPD starts at 40. That's a significant difference. Now, the sacrifices that you make is you don't get to choose your office. When you apply for the FBI, you're applying for the FBI as a whole, not a specific office. So again, my first office was San Antonio. I went to McAllen, but I was back where I really wanted to be after 5 years. So mobility is a thing that a lot of people aren't interested in. We don't have mandatory moves. We just don't know when you start the process where that empty seat's going to be. Again, people don't typically leave. They either promote or they retire. But we don't know. You can retire as early as 50 with 20 years if you serve 20 years and reach the age of 50, you can retire. You just have to retire by age 57. Fortunately for me, or maybe unfortunately, I am retiring on May 31st of this year because I'll reach my 57th birthday in May. But it's been a great career. I mean, I'm still excited about it after 24 years, and I had 11 years at the police department. So for 35 years, I've got up every day, put a gun and badge on, drove somebody else's car to work, and you know, I think we've made a difference, but I have no regrets. I've never even considered any other job. I would have never left the police department if this opportunity hadn't come along. So we do have an internship program, and I'll go over this real quick so we can get some questions in. All degree fields are welcome. Some are more valuable than others, but we do accept all applications from all degree fields, but accounting is always good, engineering, any of the STEM programs, computer science, those types of things. You are actually going to work on a squad with agents and analysts if you're selected. It is a very competitive internship. Typically, the application process opens in August and it runs through September. They're talking that it may open in May this year. So watch our website, fbijobs.gov. The thing that's unusual is our internship it's 10 weeks in the summer, usually the first full week of June through the second week of August. But you have to start the process in August or September the year before, because you have to go through a background like any other FBI employee, and we have to grant you that a top secret security clearance, even as an intern, because you're going to be exposed to things that, you know, just like the agents and the analysts are. So every FBI employee has to have that minimum of that top secret security clearance. Do that 10 weeks in the summer. It's Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, basically. You can apply to any of our 56 field offices. You can apply to headquarters, Quantico, our laboratory, lots of opportunities. The thing is, we don't provide housing. So a lot of people will apply to their nearest office, you know, because you have housing available, or where they spend their summers, you know, where mom and dad live. If you're a good intern, you do 10 weeks and they say, hey, this is going to make a good employee one day, we want to keep them on. You can do 16 hours a month, so 4 hours a week, more or less, and maintain that top secret security clearance throughout the school year. Then if you still have, you're going to be a full-time student the next summer, you can do the internship again, that 10-week internship without competing. And then when you get close to graduating, we try to hire our interns. Oftentimes they're entry-level positions, but you don't have to go through that background again. It's a good program. We've hired, I can think of 3 right off the bat that they started as an intern, they got hired as professional staff in the FBI, and now they're special agents. And I've done that in the last 4 years with people that I guess they worked with me on the squad as an intern. They were then professional staff, and then we processed them as agents. Again, once you get that top secret security clearance, you know, that's the golden egg right there. You can move right up through the process quickly. Again, we do have a drug policy, no marijuana use for at least 1 year prior to application. And that's for marijuana, anything with THC. So if you edibles, drinkables, or if you smoked it, that's at least 1 year. That just recently changed. It used to be 3 years. Any other drug, heaven forbid, you know, the cocaine, heroin, those types of things, that's a 10-year timeout period. That's not a permanent disqualifier, but it is 10 years from last use. The special agent position is the only one with the physical fitness requirements. But if you have aspirations to be an agent one day, make that part of your lifestyle early, because once you lose the physical fitness, it's harder, and the older you get, it's harder to get back in good shape. So do we want to open it up for questions?
Yes, we actually have some already posted, and I'm going to start with the ones at the Q&A. Our director of career services at LMU, Jennifer Butcher, I get a lot of questions about careers in the FBI, following or some. How does the FBI utilize psychology majors specifically? Meaning, what are some jobs they would be eligible for?
Well, it depends. Psychology, like an undergraduate, is a good base for knowledge. But oftentimes I don't want to say, get those jobs in the FBI, going to have that advanced degree or that doctorate. But again, it's just like any other degree that's useful to us, even as a special agent. What we're looking for is that when we hear diversity, oftentimes we're thinking of race or gender. And we do look at those things, but we're more interested in that diversity of thought. If everybody in the FBI was former military or law enforcement, we would attack problems those 2 ways. Military loves to tear stuff up. The local law enforcement has a way of looking at things. Those are our sheepdogs they're going to protect, but it's when you get in the FBI and you have an engineer and you have a school teacher and you have a psychology major and you have a lawyer and you have a police officer and you have a former Marine all working on the same problem, you're looking at it through those 7 or 8 views rather than just one. And that's why the FBI is successful. So I don't know that I can say we would hire psychology majors for a psychology type job, but there's jobs in the FBI, both as an agent and probably as an analyst, for someone that's a psychology major. We get a lot of questions about BAU, Behavior Analysis Unit, and everyone's watching TV and you see these things. Those units exist. I think there's maybe 5 or 6 different units. Some of them deal with just terrorism, some of them deal with violent crime and things like that. Those units exist, but you have to be either a really good special agent or a really good analyst first before you can apply for those positions. I think you have to be in at least 6 years before you can apply for those positions. So we encourage everyone that comes in, regardless of what your background is, get good at whatever you're assigned. Because we investigate like 250 different federal violations. You only hear about, the kidnappings and the bank robberies, the drug cases, terrorism cases. We have a cyber squad. We have the white collar squad alone does civil rights, public corruption, healthcare fraud, complex financial crimes. So there's such a variety of crimes that they're investigating. Whatever you get assigned, get good at what you're doing. And then if you want to get in one of those specialized units, there'll be opportunities for you to do so. But they're not going to take the average Joe. They want someone that's really ambitious.
I think that kind of answers one of the other questions she had was, how does one become a profiler?
Right, and that would be the behavior analysis unit. And what they do is they work not only with FBI cases, but local police cases, state police cases, or other federal agencies. And they will look at all the evidence and really give you guidance on how to approach somebody, what type of techniques would work when you're interviewing people. Because, everyone's different, everyone responds to things differently. So it's really quite fascinating. Sometimes they'll come out to the field to work. Oftentimes you send case files to them and they review it and they give you some guidance on how to proceed.
Very interesting. Another one, do you employ forensic psychologists? If so, what is the title of the job position? What are the qualifications needed to get this position?
I don't know that I can answer that. We do have them but a lot of our psychologist work are in the hiring process. They're in our HRD. Believe it or not, FBI, when we're hiring people, we do not give people, like when I was a local law enforcement officer and I was going through the process, I went through the psychological exam. The FBI does not do that unless you have life experiences in which you're traumatized. Oftentimes, it is the military, police, people that were in combat situations, people that were victims of crime in their lives. Sometimes when people were they've been sexually assaulted. Those are the people that get those reviews through the psychological services. Typically, they're just going to make sure that you're not a danger to yourself or others. Because again, all FBI agents are carrying a gun. If someone has suicidal ideation or something like that, we don't want to give them the gun. We're going to have to identify that early on. So again, I think those that's another degree where you would really want to get into that special agent role, maybe, because we are not first responders, we are investigators. So oftentimes you can use those skills, the psychological stuff, in your investigation, and particularly when you're interviewing people. Interviewing is a skill. On TV, they're in people's faces, they're shining the bright light, they're making people uncomfortable. I've talked to bank robbers and kidnappers, just like I'm talking to you today. Um, you don't get much mileage out of somebody when you're hollering at them. You can't intimidate people. You can provoke people. I mean, you can get any man to bow up on you. The key is, can you build rapport with them and, get them talking?
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm looking, we've got kind of two questions I'm going to combine here. We have some attendees that are law students at our Duncan School of Law. And what types of positions are there in the FBI for attorneys? How do they utilize lawyers?
Okay, a lot of our lawyers, and that was one of the jobs that we used to not require any professional work experience before you applied. You could go right from law school in. And really, when Hoover was our director, he only hired two types of people, lawyers and accountants. Of course, that's changed. We have really diversified since then. But a lot of our lawyers are agents. They're working cases. Again, they understand the law. They understand, again, the Constitution is our guiding light. So we're going to follow that. We do have positions in every office where it's known as the Chief Division Counsel or the Assistant Chief Division Counsel, where they are basically the FBI's lawyer in a particular office. They'll review arrest operation plans. They will review search warrants, and just to make sure everybody's on, hey, we're following all the rules. Now, we also work with the U.S. Attorney's Office for those same things. So we have more than one lawyer looking at everything. Headquarters has the Office of General Counsel up there. That is primarily in Washington, D.C., but they're the ones, coming up with the rules and regulations that we follow, make sure we're doing everything according to law. So there are roles, but probably the most common role is special agent.
Special agent. So the age requirement would still apply to the agents, but would it apply if they were doing those other positions?
No, if they're a non-agent, the agent position is the only one with the age requirement, because you have to get at least 20 years of service in before you reach that age of 57. So a lot of times we oftentimes hire our professional staff, they're much more mature,
Matt is asking, I'm preparing for a career in the FBI, but first looking to gain experience in other federal law enforcement departments. Is there anything you would recommend prior to application?
No, I mean, really go through our website, the FBIjobs.gov, look at the things that can disqualify you. Again, I sometimes just sound like a daddy. Hey, don't be smoking dope, don't be stealing stuff. We're not expecting people to have lived a perfect life. We do expect you to be honest, so what disqualifies a lot of people is they're within our drug policy. Like people have smoked marijuana when they're in high school or college, but then when they get into the background, they'll lie about it. I had one guy that smoked marijuana one time, 11 years prior to application. Certainly would not have disqualified him, but because he didn't disclose it, he failed his polygraph exam when it came to the drug questions. And now he's ineligible for any FBI job. And that's only because if we hired you after you failed a polygraph exam, we would always have to disclose that to the court and to defense attorneys and acknowledge that you failed a FBI administered polygraph exam. And the jury's always going to hear, but they would always be able to say, well, he's been dishonest before. Why should we believe him today? So we just don't hire people that fail polygraph exams.
Okay. Well, we are just about out of time. We actually have 1 minute, but I wanted to let you answer this last question. She's asking, what's the name of the app that was to improve your physical fitness?
If you just go to the App Store and you Google, can you see this?
Yes.
That's on the video, but it's just the FBI physical fitness test. If you put that in the App Store, there's two that look alike. Ours is free, and no, we do not monitor it. People are always concerned, are you watching me work,
Mhm.
checking to see if I'm using it. There's another one that looks similar, and it's either $3.99 or $4.99. If they ask you to pay for it, it's not the FBI's, but it just, the FBI physical fitness test. You should be able to find it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And we truly appreciate you coming today. If anybody wants to reach out for more information, should they go to the FBI jobs.gov site?
They can either go there and there's a button there to find a recruiter, or if they go to Knoxville applicants at FBI.gov, that comes to, there's only 2 of us in Knoxville that do the HR stuff. That's myself and Hope Pryor. Hope's going to be here long before or long after I retire in May. But Knoxville applicants at FBI.gov, that we monitor that box if they have questions. That's the best way to stay in touch with us.
Well, thank you so much. We do appreciate you coming today.
All right, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. And just let me remind you.